right, there we go. So the way that these things work is we usually start with a quick round of introductions, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Usually we don't get around to everyone. And then we'll move on to our main event, which is the talk, which Bastian will be presenting. And after that, we have a quick news segment to just catch up on some recent Rust news from some articles that I've selected out. And finally, we'll have a Q&A at the end, a chance for extra feedback. And we'll also be doing our prize draw at that time for the live video. So yeah, let's start by having... actually, I'll start first. I'll introduce myself. So hello, I'm Jonathan Louie. I run the Vancouver Rust Meetups. I work for Bitquill Technologies. They're also our sponsors. So yeah, big shout out to them for funding these events. And yeah, I've been working there as a software developer for 4 years now. Have touched Rust a little bit at work, but haven't really been working with Rust all that much lately. Mostly been a C++ developer, but yeah, that's me. Why don't we go to Chris Miller next?
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Chris. Live down in Seattle, just joining because we're all remote. I work as a software engineer in Seattle at a large bookstore's IT department. Yeah, I use Rust at work and recreationally. That's about it.
Cool. Ed, did you want to go next? Ed R?
I don't use Rust at work. I'm interested in it, and I'm hoping to pick up some info today on web development using it. It sounds like an interesting topic.
All right. Next we'll go to Sean Chen. Did you want to introduce yourself, Sean? All right, maybe not. Let's go to, is that Raj Kumar? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, myself Raj Kumar. I live in Boston. I work for a company called iMedia. I work as both in Java and Scala and data pipeline. Yeah, that's about me. I'm learning Rust. I don't use it in industry. Yeah, I'm interested in learning Rust.
All right, cool. And good luck with the Java. Let's go to Ned Karian.
Hey friends, I'm a software developer for a company called GoFundMe here in the Bay Area. We don't officially use Rust at work yet, but there's enough mindshare among software developers. And with the recent Log4j vulnerabilities, there's been a lot of talk about rolling out some of our CLIs from Python to Rust and stuff like that.
All right. Let's pick a few more here. Let's see, who do we have? Joseph Post.
Yeah, hi there. I'm a software engineer. I work at a company called C.H. Robinson. They do global logistics. I work on a team called the Tools and Patterns team that you can think of like the framework team. Lots of C#, web technologies. Not using Rust at the company, but just personally, recreationally. I normally go to the Rust Dallas meetup. That's kind of where my home base is, but I saw the topic for this one, so I was interested in checking it out.
Yeah, well, welcome and great to have you here.
Thanks.
Oh, I didn't notice Bochun, you're here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I didn't turn on my video. I'm still waking up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no problem.
my name is Bochun Bai. I work for a company called Skills. We are a gaming platform. Mostly at work, we use Java and Golang, and only one project using Rust. We use that for Istio filter. So yeah, that's basically myself. I'm co-organizer here. Welcome, everyone.
All right. I think I'm gonna leave it at that for today. I want to get the prize draw going here, so let me just paste that into the chat window right now. So if you want, you can enter your name there, and you'll be entered into a live video prize draw. Please leave a name that will be easily recognizable on meetup.com, so I can message you later with the actual prize code. Otherwise, it might be difficult for me to find you. But yeah, just if you're interested, leave your name, and you can win a live video. I don't know if you want to explain this more, Bastian, at all, but
I have to say I wasn't like involved in the prize. Like Emma, for which like live video on the platform? Like, do you know like the details? Like I just know that you get like a voucher for like one of like the live video products, right? Like you can choose.
yeah, I believe they're
Is this right?
yeah, they're like lessons, I believe. Like in video
Yeah, so
format.
like from like Manning, it's basically it's like instead of a book, it's basically like a tutorial, like a hands-on yeah, like video tutorials about how to do certain things. I think there are like one or two like about Rust out. And it basically like the one for Rust, I think it goes through like lifetimes and yeah, like borrowing and all of like the basics. So I guess that's like pretty much like from like what I've heard from the audience today, this might be like the best one to pick if you're into Rust. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's even, oh no, like they're not from Canada, they're from the States, but up there, like what is, yeah, like next to New York State, up there at the border, I think they come from like the Rust Belt, and they have like a Rust agency, like freelancer agency, and I think those two are pretty good. It's called Rust in Motion. So I can highly recommend to check this one out if you win. Also, if not.
All right. So yeah, I will be posting the link again later once the talk is over. But for now, yeah, you can you have the floor, Bastian, if you want to get started.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Let me full screen. So thank you for coming by on a Saturday. I appreciate it, and I appreciate thank you for having me. So today's talk, and I go about like my person later after the next slide. This talk is about how to think about Rust in a web environment, like because it's different if you come from Java or from Node, from Go, from C#. Each like web stack looks a bit different, and I think it deserves like a bit of a longer onboarding phase when it comes to Rust, since it's also like a systems programming language, and it leaves a few big pieces out in the web stack. And this talk is about how to understand the web stack in Rust and what Rust comes with and what you have to bring for yourself, like in form of crates, and how rich the ecosystem is, and my sort of like recommendations if you start your journey with Rust into the web development. Yeah, like tools and websites and crates and how it shapes up. So this talk should give you like a nice head start into your web development journey with Rust. So I'm Bastian Gruber. I basically write Rust for the past 4 years. Professionally, I wrote like Rust for about like 1.5 years for a company called Kraken in San Francisco, which is like a crypto exchange. I worked there as a systems engineer. I'm currently working also for a company headquartered in San Francisco called Twilio, which I'm, like maybe some of you know the company. It's like a communications company, like text messaging, voice and video, email and sorts of things. I don't do like Rust there. I work as a solutions architect, but in terms of Rust, I'm also like the founder and a co-organizer of like one of the Rust meetups in Berlin called Rust and Tell. And I'm also currently writing the book Rust Web Development, like with Manning. And my background is and I'm based in Berlin, in Germany, and my wife is actually Canadian, so I've been to Vancouver quite a few times. Feel free to follow me on Twitter to find out like the latest infos about my book or talks or something Rust related. And in the past, so I mainly come from like Node.js and Go. I've worked on the mainframe with COBOL. I worked with Java in the past, but for the last 3, 4, 5 years, I've mainly worked with Node.js, and then I made a switch to Rust. So my thinking is basically also shaped from how to switch from a language like Node or like Java to Rust. And in case you didn't see the book yet, or you're curious, the book is, I'm currently writing, like I just submitted this week, the chapter 6, so you can check out the MEEP like version of the book, and I plan to have finished the book by Q1 next year. And it's a very pragmatic approach about how to write and approach the language in a web development context. So I mostly work for startups to get a product out of the door. I'm a highly pragmatist. I'm not like a language philosopher or like a theorist. I just like to ship features and products, and the mindset comes from this point of view. So if you look for like more of like a hands-on book, and there is the like official Rust book out, and I think it's more like a broader book to understand like the language from A to Z. This book is more about how to use the language in a web context. And if you want to start a new role in Rust, like this book is great to get you started. Or if you want to hire for your Rust team, I think this book is also great to give your first hires. This book has a website. Feel free to check it out. I plan to write a few more articles in the future, and I in the future try to develop this like website also as my starting point. If I forgot something, if I need like a tool, a link, snippet, I try to put this all on this website, so I can just have like a one hub to access the other things like around Rust web development. So feel free to check it out. And so today's talk is structured just like this. I start with trying to show the Rust web ecosystem, what the standard library doesn't bring, what other crates have to bring in to or like onto the table to actually write like web applications easily, like with Rust. And like the second point is to show more about what is happening behind the scenes. Because if you work in Rust, you might join a company which works more on the systems programming language side or more closer to like a protocol, or they might implement their own protocol. So I think it helps to understand where these abstraction layers fit in case you join a company and they don't, I don't know, like use an HTTP framework, and then you have no idea like where on the map you currently are. I show like the components of a running like web service. So like what a typical Rust like web service, like basically how your cargo toml might look like if you start a new job in Rust, like with the web, or you want to create your own like web service. These are the things I think you should bring. Then we can browse through some code of how like a web service in Rust might look like. So to get a bit of a feel and to get a sense, and to also have a starting point for your own project, so for your company. And the last 2 points are more about like the wider Rust, like the wider Rust ecosystem, about like the package manager, the CLI tool Rust comes with, and also like websites and other helpers which might help you in your day-to-day Rust journey. Some of them you might know, but as you see here, you can access this a slide deck. So afterwards, or like in case you want to get a quick rundown, you can check it out and see for yourself. So let's start for like the Rust and the web. I think that many companies ask themselves, like, why should I use Rust or like a systems programming language if I do like web development? Why not use Go or Python or Node.js or like Java? Like, what does make the language so great in this context? And the honest truth is, not so much in terms of like what it brings to the table to be a good companion in your like web development journey. The reason is this, and I explain later why Rust is still for me for now the best choice in terms of web development. It's because it wants to be a systems programming language first, which means that this language is used also maybe on like in smaller devices, on hardware which is not plugged into, I don't know, like an HTTP connection. So it wants to be small, and it wants to be sort of like used as a C or C++ replacement. And I think this was the main reason why like the core team decided to not to ship an HTTP support in the language. This means you can just open up like a TCP socket or stream in the standard library. So like there's not like a standard net HTTP server like there is in Go. So just from the start, you can just open like a TCP port or like a socket in the kernel, and you can specify the port and the address, and then all incoming streams are basically handled like a TCP stream. You can use obviously UTP-2, but this example is like a TCP stream. So technically, you can send HTTP packages over this socket, and you can print them out, and you can treat them as an HTTP, like message, which crates do. So like you need help now, because I don't think if you want to replace Java or like Node.js, you won't start just to create your own HTTP abstraction, build your own HTTP server, and build your own HTTP framework. To take it a step further, if you want to write and run asynchronous code, which I think you might want to if you deploy a web server written in Rust, you might want to use an asynchronous programming like model. And this is also not possible like right out of like the standard library, which means you basically just have an synchronous TCP socket and that's it. But it comes like with like the type and the syntax to write asynchronous code. But to actually execute and run this code, you need a runtime, which again, like in like Node.js, you have the V8. In Go, you have the Go runtime. In Java, I think is the JVM. And in Rust, there's like nothing, and you need an external crate to do this with. And this is always part of the runtime, but it's good to have this in mind that you also need to talk to the asynchronous kernel APIs. Like you can't just use like the standard sync abstractions in the standard library. You need like a crate for this, and the standard, I think, in the ecosystem is Mio. So if you want to write this example in an asynchronous way, and this is quite a lot to take in, and it does a little bit more than our TCP example from the start, you use Tokyo, and you also see here in the top that you use the TCP listener from the Tokyo library and not the one from the standard library, which would be the synchronous one. And this is also like important to know, and there is like a tutorial on the Tokyo website. So even if you would never write this type of code by hand, I think it's good to go through, because again, this sharpens your mind. It makes you understand what's actually going on behind the scenes. And it might be that you join like a company and you see a Rust job opening, and it turns out that these folks are coding more closer to the kernel, and then you might see some form of this code floating around. So I think it's good to know in the back of your head and to go it through like once or twice in your life, just to be prepared if you are not used to these types of things, obviously. But if you use a framework, all of this is basically hidden behind a framework. So it depends on which abstraction layer you want to pick up your TCP package. There are some companies who just want a basic HTTP server, and they don't need a full-blown like web framework. And then you can use like a crate called Hyper, which then gives you an HTTP server or a client, and then you can handle the HTTP packets by yourself. If this is a smaller application, you can obviously just use like the TCP packages and build your own protocol on top of it, or you also have a variety of web frameworks on top of it. I think that this graphic helps, and you might think like, why do I need to know this if I use like a web framework and then I can just code like in Python or in, I don't know, like Node.js. I think it's good to know that each abstraction on top of a TCP comes from like another crate or like another person. And if something breaks, if you have performance problems, it's good to know like where to look out in terms of bug fixing. And here's an example from a web framework called Axum. I think this is how you pronounce it. It's fairly new. I don't know if it's production ready yet, but this is the example code. And you see that all of this stuff from here is basically gone. And you use it just like this. And you see here that, like the comment says, it runs with Hyper. And based on the graphic, now you see, and the web framework Axiom is not on the graphic yet, but they basically use the crate called Hyper in the background for the HTTP implementation. So they run an Hyper HTTP server and build their like web framework on top of it. And I think this is quite a nice and short asynchronous HTTP server code. You see that we also use Tokyo here. Most like web frameworks, they tell you, or like they build on top of a runtime, so you don't have a choice most of the time. But you have to bring Tokyo into your cargo toml, and you have to bring Axiom in your cargo toml. And Hyper comes with Axiom, but Tokyo, it won't. So that's a first small example. And you see that we also use the like a sync await syntax here, which you might be familiar with. And to finalize the broad overview of the ecosystem, I think these are the current like the recommendation crates you use if you face an implementation of like a logging or like a tracing library. It's called tracing. Like it's also developed close to the Tokyo ecosystem. If you want to have a database access, you can basically choose an ORM, which is like the standard is Diesel. And if you want to write your own SQL, I think you would use SQLX. The beauty of Rust is that it has quite a beautiful way of serializing and deserializing data from into JSON, BSON, and I think even protopuf and other types of data formats. And like the library, so I think that most of you have heard about it or even like used it. For AWS, this lib or like this crate is still advised not to use in production, but is heavily used. I think it's heavily maintained, and I would use this at the moment. And for the other ones, these are my current recommendations. So if you start in your Rust web journey, I think these are the crates you start with. And if they, I don't know, like fail you, then choose something else. But to dig a bit more deeper behind the scenes, and I think it's important at least to have, or like to have it heard or seen like once, just to make you more aware of like what's actually going on behind the scenes, which, as we showed in like the previous slides, if you get a TCP request into like an open socket in the kernel, this message is basically, or like you basically open up like a TCP socket like with Hyper, but you use underneath like the runtime, which is handling all the tasks you create in your code. And Tokyo is handling then the handing off to and from the kernel. So, and this is like the Warp web framework example. You create like an HTTP request. This is mostly like an like written with a .await. So it's an asynchronous way of handling an HTTP request in the background, and then Tokyo would handle this request to this socket to the kernel. And as we said in the beginning, you have to add Tokyo to your Targo to your cargo terminal. But if you use a web framework, the HTTP implementation is already comes like with the framework. Yeah, and I mentioned this. So like the building blocks we showed also in the previous slide, that you don't just need a syntax and the runtime, you also need a type. So instead of having like an integer or like a string, you need a special type which can tell the compiler and then like the runtime, like sort of a state. Like it has to tell us, is the request done? Is the long running computation like done, or but do we still need to check up on like a result? And in Rust, this is called a future. And if you come from like Node or Go, in like Node.js, it's a promise. In Go, it's Go routines and channels. That I think like you don't really have like this type equivalent as like Node and Rust that do. But in Rust, it's called a future, and a future is a trait, which means, and this is how like the trait, how you say syntax, not like how the trait implementation or like the contract looks like. Like it has a type field which tells the compiler which type after the computation is done will be like returned. And you have to implement a poll function, which then can, like the runtime is calling this poll, and this will return like an enum poll. And this can be either like ready and has like the type wrapped in it, or it has like the status pending, so that the runtime knows to continue make like progress on this future. And if we might want to implement a future ourselves, and in case you use like a web framework and you create like an HTTP service, you might never even implement your own future. But again, it's important to know how it looks like and how it works. So you can have just a normal struct, and you have a count. I can see that it's might even be here like a problem because I used the wrong type. And then you implement a poll function. You count and you say it's done or it's pending, and if it's done, you return poll ready and you return 3, or like in this case 3. So, and if you, for example, specify this struct and implement the trait, you can't just call this struct or like starter, or like just to say var count is my future, and this would do like nothing. You need to add a dot await. So this tells like the compiler to actually start to work on the future. If you come from JavaScript or from like Node, this would, if you create like a new variable, this would already start to make progress on the promise. In Rust, you have to put a dot await on it to actually start to make progress. And for this, like the runtime comes into the play, and it will actively start to work on the future until it's complete. And here's again our overview, like what's needed in Rust. And this is just like a diagram. I think it's nice to know that like a runtime basically has an executor and the reactor, and the executor like is handing off, in this case, an HTTP request to our kernel like abstraction. This will create the things in the kernel to actually ship this HTTP request out on the socket. If there comes an answer onto this socket, the terminal will, or like the kernel will talk to the abstraction here, and then the reactor will like notify the executor, and then like once this is done, it will getting passed on again in our variable or our outcome of the function. So this is sort of like the workflow of how it works behind the scenes if you start to create an asynchronous HTTP request with Rust. But also this is abstracted away in the web framework, and as we've seen, this is an example like with Warp, and it basically looks like the same as Exum. This will also start a hyper HTTP server in the background. It opens up a socket in the kernel, and then we actively, since this will like return a future, since we learned that mu is an asynchronous abstraction over the kernel API, so this will return a future. If mu created this socket, or like the kernel did, the HTTP server can start. But to actively do this work, we have to call $await on the returning future from the run function. And how this like looks like in a bit of like a bigger, or like not too big project. This is the example code. And I forgot to say, like, I don't see your faces, but in case you have a question or you want to say something, just feel free to unmute yourself and say something. I maybe have like missed something. I don't know. And you can check it out on the github.com Rust Web Development /code. And in chapter 6, this, like the web services as far progressed that it's quite nice, I think, to see of how it would look like. And we can check into like the cargo toml. We can see the crates we have like the web framework. We have assert.json. We have the runtime. I created like my own crate out of my handling of like the failure path in the application, and we also have the tracing library. And the code, if you're, I don't know, like used to Python or like Node.js or like Ruby, I think this looks quite familiar, which I think is quite an achievement for a systems programming language to be, like used like this and read like this. And Rust can get quite verbose, but I think in typical high-level applications, it mostly looks quite nice. So in terms of like Warp, this is how it would look like, I think, with Exum and a different, like web frameworks. This mostly might look like the same, which means we specify a path. For example, to update the questions, we expect like a parameter which we can type to. So in case we would pass a parameter, which is a number, this path wouldn't be triggered and we would return like a 404 or something else if we want to. How long do I have? I think I have enough time. Can charge later. And then we hand it off to our like route handler. And I think this example is also good to see how you would structure like a web service and how to call this route handler inside the main. I talked with a bunch of people in the beginning of the Rust journey, and all had sort of trouble to understand how to actually call code from a different like module. And I think the key is to understand that you have to specify in the main.rs, you have to specify like the the modules you want to import, and then later on you can call like a public function like this. But inside your routes module, you need a mod.rs file, and then you need to expose your public type or like submodule here as like a pub mod. And here we have questions, and we have the update question here, like which is also like a public. And yeah,
I
So I
think
think
in
this-
newer editions of Rust, you don't need the mod.rs file, do you? I'm at least I'm pretty sure. I've heard that that's not the case anymore.
I tried it. Like I might have to check it again because I tried and it didn't. I know that you don't have to anymore have two, like you don't have to have a use. I think back then you have to use this and use like routes, like you had to have like 2 lines here, which I think now you don't. But I still think that you need a mod file, but that might be wrong. It's good to check out. I will check out. That's a good point. I will check it out afterwards. I think I can. Maybe I can check it out now. Let me quickly text. Let me see if this even compiles. This compiles, so let's see if we would remove. So, and you say that you don't, for example, in routes, you don't need like the mod here? Yeah?
Yeah, I've heard that there's a way to avoid having that mod.rs file in I think, the Rust 2018 edition, but I can't actually recall.
Yeah. I'm not sure, like, let's see if this would compile. Yeah, maybe you have to do something else to make this work. But it's good to check out. I will definitely check this out and follow up on my Twitter stream. And now I'm getting my charger. So give me a sec to. So, thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, so feel free to check it out. I think projects like this are quite nice, even if it's not your style. I think it's nice to have like a running sort of like working like web service you can take with you from company to company and test some things out. You might join a company and they don't want to use, for example, Tokyo. They want to use like a different like runtime, or they don't want to use like this web framework. They want to use something else. I think it's nice to always have a sort of like a project which is less than, I don't know, like less than 500 lines of code to try some things out. This would be my like recommendation, since I think especially now as a Rust developer, you might have no idea and like what is the difference between the different frameworks. There's no clear like leader yet in some parts of the ecosystem. So I think it's good to have something to play around with. And I think like this is a good base, like the chapter 6 is quite a good base. But in case you want to use something else, this would just be my recommendation to develop like a little toy project for yourself. And it's also good then to apply for a job, like with this toy project. So this, I think, like I learned a bit too late in my career to always have, or like to bring something like with me to a job to develop, to sharp like my skills and to adjust like along the way. And Rust, and like this part, like you might know, but maybe not, but I just wanted to bring it up since it's about like the tool set. And Rust comes with quite a lot of standardized tools and features to make your code more solid than I found in other languages. For example, the comments and the doc, like the comments and the doc. Comments are two things in Rust. It's quite common that you find a project or a crate which has those three slashes, which means these are doc comments. And if you generate like the documentation for your project, these will end up in your documentation. And even this code, if you create like a library, not a binary, but if you create a library and you run the tests, this code will be executed also in the tests. So your example code is never outdated since it actually runs. And of course, like you can say like no run and then it doesn't run if you don't want to have like a valid code here. But I think it's quite nice to know, and it's quite common that people write like a lot of doc comments like this. And you can also have like the normal comments which won't end up in your documentation. You can go to the command line and you hit cargo doc, and you can see it here. Like you can say cargo doc open. This will take a while. This is like another downside of the language. Like the first time you will compile your web service, this might take some time depending on your machine. And let's check this out later. And this will be the result. So I think this is the same example. We have extract pagination. We doc commented this function, and we have like example code. This is all like Markdown style. And you see here the example code, and you see like the headers, and you see like the function signature too. So it's quite nice in Rust, because this already, I feel like, makes your projects much nicer, since if you onboard a new team member, it's nice to have actually like the documentations. And you see here, this was just done here, like it opened up like a browser, and you see that you will even get the documentation for things you didn't doc comment around. So like this is just taken from your code, and like Rust, like by itself, does like a bare bone documentation of your code base, which I think it's nice. You have like a linding, and it's not part of the standard library, but it's standard in the Rust ecosystem to use Clippy. You have to add it on the command line by a like Rust up component, and then you can run cargo Clippy. And I have to say, this is fantastic if you're new to the language. Cargo Clippy, if you add like a bunch of like rules, like stricter rules, this helps you write more idiomatic Rust. For example, you might be tempted to write this, and then Clippy tells you is empty is actually like better and clearer here, which I think is quite nice. This is like next to the compiler, which I think is the most important part of the language, which makes it harder to write the language in the first place, but it's sort of like a programmer buddy, like a pair programmer on your like machine to help you write good Rust code, and Clippy will help you to write more idiomatic Rust. And you can also try to fix those things automatically, which sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You also have the code formatter, and you can add like the rules there too. It's like Rust FMT, and then you run it like this cargo FMT. And the testing is built in, like you can just use test macros. Like this, and then you can like write target tests.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Sorry, your audio quality is getting very very choppy. Yeah,
And let me switch to the. Yeah, I have to. Let me use these ones here. Does this work good?
yes, that
this
sounds
work?
much better.
Okay, well, yeah, then it's maybe I just plugged in this external one and it seems like a bit broken. Okay, perfect. Thanks for letting me know. So
there's also a question in the chat here.
okay.
Can you recommend any of the web frameworks, Warp, Axum, etc., that can handle server-side rendering of React-based components, like in Next.js?
So server-side rendering, I think, was in like none of the frameworks I came across a priority or even implemented. I have a friend who created his application and he basically did this sort of like by hand a little bit, but also not. So like he did like server-side like rendering, and I think that he used like an external crate for this. But I think in the framework, I wouldn't know if some framework would support it out of the box. I think that you have to Google, because like the last time I heard about it was a year ago, so I'm not sure of how fast this has progressed. So no, I can't. I don't think it's implemented in any of the frameworks, and you might have to use an external crate to do this. I can follow up and see, yeah. For like the logging, tracing, and the debugging, that's a bit of like a bigger topic, but it's in the book. So feel free to like read the book. It's important to know, and you might like know this maybe from Java or from other like logging libraries and Java in the last few weeks, like especially that Rust is also like using a facade pattern. If you don't use like tracing, which I think you should use tracing if you write an asynchronous web application, I would just use this because it's like the best and good. If you just want to start like with a normal, I don't know, like a smaller application, in Rust, you need two logging grades. So like it uses like a facade pattern, which like the log crate is abstracting away. And the actual implementation is then done by like another actual like logging implementation. So this like log crate comes with your like logging like macros, but the actual implementation will come from another logging library. And you have, for example, like the log4 RS, which gives you also structured logs and JSON, which will then do the actual implementation. So this is just good to have in mind to understand like what a facade pattern is, and to know that you have to use two different libraries. And the advantages, obviously, if you don't want to use, for example, log4 RS, but something else, you don't have to change your code, because your like macros will still look like the same, but just the implementation in the background will be different.
So tracing
Yeah.
doesn't use a logging facade, does it?
No, this comes with its own sort of implementation. I think it's possible to just use the facade, because you might have like you might have like a super large code base and you decided, oh shoot, I want to use or I want to switch to tracing. Tracing is exposing also your usual info and warning stuff. But if you move more to like the tracing mindset, I think that you would use, like, what would you use here? I have it here in my code. Actually, question. I think, yeah, like you would use the like event, like macro instead of the info or like warning macro. But it's exposing these things. So if you change your like logging implementation, for example, from log4rs to tracing, you don't have to change all of your code like right away, which is nice. And then you can go, like from file to file and change it more like with like a tracing mindset behind it. And last but not least, I think it's good to bookmark these. It's good to have them on your like radar. And the first one is obviously the Rust playground. I would still recommend to always have a running little like toy project on the side, because the Rust playground, you can't really test different like logging. Like a different logging library. But if you struggle with, I don't know, like a lifetime problem, or the compiler is throwing some stuff at you and you have no idea why, try to get this piece of code out and try to rebuild it in the playground and see if it also fails, and try to understand why. And I think the playground is much faster to think through some stuff and try some stuff out than to do like a cargo new and do it in your, I don't know, like, separate code base maybe. So I think that the Rust playground is quite nice. The next one, and I'm not a big fan of these coding katas or how you call them, but I found that for like Rust, this is actually really, really nice. I don't know if I can log in. So I'm not really, I don't have like the setup here. It's not my primary computer. But I would highly recommend to check out this website, join the Rust track, because all of these examples, they basically say, now we try to learn how like a hash map works in Rust, and here's your code example. And they're all done in maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or in 20 minutes. You can submit them, and then you also see the best or like the highest voted community solution, which helps you to learn, since I sometimes think, oh, like I did like quite a nice and short solution for this, and then I saw like the community solution, and I always learned something new. So I think if you're actually serious with finding like a Rust shop or like learning the language, this is great to do like once a day or like twice a week and go through these little exercises, because it can be hard to get into the language and to find a project to learn the language with, and I find these quite nice. And this is quite astounding. I actually had a talk 3-4 weeks ago at the Rust Oslo meetup, and it turns out the organizer of the Oslo meetup like wrote like the backend for this. So this helps you especially if you work in the web and you call an external API and you figure out, oh, like this is like the JSON response. How should I structure this code? And I always use, obviously, if you're into cryptocurrencies or maybe not, but I find these examples sometimes nice. If you, for example, have you get something returned like this, and you wonder how would this look like in a struct, and this tool will create an example like version of this JSON to like a Rust typed structures, and you can even see where's the data date, where's the ID string, where's ID, and if you would do now like a 1, 2, 3. No. Oh yeah, and now it's an integer. So this works like quite fast, And it's a great way if you work with external APIs to create this as a first case, like for you, and you can copy paste it and adjust it. And it even does like the Surday renaming for you. So you stay, I don't know, sometimes, for example, you would get end date, but you don't want to have this in your like Rust code. So like what you would do is a Surday rename. Okay, like you can't change it and basically tell Surday that end date will be transformed into end date here, like basically like what they did here. So like this tool is really, really nice. I would highly recommend to have it bookmarked somewhere. This really comes in handy if you talk to external APIs. And yeah, and last but not least, obviously, like my website, it's not as fully fleshed out yet, but if you want to hear like the past talks I gave, if you want to listen to some podcasts I was on to get an idea, I tried to write a few more articles. I try to use like this website and as the book. Like I don't really do it for the money, as I think that we all know, like to write a book is not really like the best choice if you want to make like a lot of money in a short amount of time. I really want to like write the book and create this website for myself and for my future jobs. And I work mostly as a freelancer. So I like to have something in my hand to give to new like hires or to new like team members. And I try to develop this book and the website for myself and for them as like a resource hub into the Rust web journey. And the articles should also reflect this. But I have 2 kids at home and it's quite hard to find the time to actually do stuff. But in case like you want more challenges, go through this article, for example, here, and I think there are a few nice links to some like example code and articles to understand more about like the web and Rust in general. So I hope that this gives you like a rounded idea of how it looks like and what you need to learn and what you have to bring with you if you want to write Rust web services. Yeah, thanks for listening and thanks for showing up.
All right. Thank you for the excellent presentation, Bastian. I definitely learned a few things myself, especially as someone who's currently working on a Rocket application. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be using transform.tools. That's really good to know about.
Yeah.
We do have a question in the chat here from Joseph Post. Any thoughts around using Rust for client-side web applications?
So you mean in the browser? I think so. I don't know of any web frameworks. I know about a few like desktop application like UI frameworks like with Rust. I just know since I worked for Kraken and they basically hired the guy who wrote like a UI framework, but I forgot of how is it called. I will find it out, but I'm not sure if it runs in the web. Browser UI, maybe I find it. Probably not. Maybe you can check out RVGUI yet. Probably not. Like what you can have a look at is like Wasm, which is not really like a UI framework, but you can basically write like WebAssembly for client-side code. If this is in the direction, but I think, for example, oh yeah, I think this is even the guy. Oh no, it's not, but oh yeah, I think this is like what I meant, but maybe not. I've never used this, so maybe someone else did. So I don't know of how it compares to like React or something like this. Yeah, nice find. Thoughts? I would definitely check it out. I didn't yet, since I didn't touch front-end code in the past 5 years, so this was not like my main focus. But I wouldn't check it out in terms of maybe getting a job. And I could be wrong here, but I think if you want to write it for yourself, fine, and for your company, yes. But if you look to make the move to Rust, I think the first choice should be to have it in your backend stack, because I think there are more jobs out there for like Rust backend web developers. But if you want to use these types of things, yeah, sure. I mean, I will also bookmark this later on. I would also check this one out. I think there is a second one, because I think this is not the one I meant. I think there's like a second one, because I think they use it for CryptoWatch. Oh yeah, iced. But I don't know if this runs in the web. Does it run in the web? Oh yeah, this runs in the web. So I know that, I think maybe they migrated CryptoWatch to this here. But I would also check this one out. So maybe this is like a second one on your list to have a look at.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns? Yeah, so I'm like more than halfway done. I just submitted like the final round of like the chapter 6. I'm currently writing chapter 7. The book has, yeah, like 11 chapters, and my plan is, because I go on vacation in April and I really want to have the book done by this. I also come to Canada in June, so this is like my latest point. I really want to just to go on vacation and enjoy, yeah, like maybe like the East Coast, because like my wife is from Toronto, so I might not make it out to Vancouver, but I try to really have it done by June. But each chapter goes through like tons of internal reviews, so this always takes a bit longer than I want. I also have 2 kids. This also takes much up of my time. But I plan now to have like 1 chapter out each month, and then to actually be a bit faster, and March, April is my really my plan. But if you buy the MEEP, you can read the first 5 chapters and soon the first 6 chapters. And I think they're solid. So I think that you already get something for your money. So yeah, but if not, then yeah, like maybe wait until around April to get the book.
I've got one more question. Do you go over any benchmarking strategies at all?
Yeah, that's a good point. This was not planned, but I might bring it in. It always depends, because for me, benchmarking, like the book is meant, hey, I come from Go or I come from Java and I want to do Rust. If you rewrite it in Rust, or like you write like a new one in Rust, it should already be so much faster than your previous stack. But if you really work for a high profile company, maybe in finance, so where you're concerned about like your data structures, I might bring it in as sort of like an appendix, because I think there's bench. I know, like that's the name, but like what is like the Rust, like the benchmarking tool?
I've heard some people using Criterion.
Yeah, right. This is like what I used in the past, I think. Let me check if this was it, what I used. Yeah, I used this in the past, and this worked quite nice. I think like there's not so much to say about it. It can be quite tricky. Like the first time I used it wrong, and I think it actually quite interesting to know like what you have to think about if you want to write a benchmark and then compare it to like another application. So This, I think it's quite nice. So, but that's a good pointer. I will like write this down after the talk here, and I might have it as an appendix. Like it doesn't really fit in any of the chapters, but I might write 3-4 pages in the end. Because I think like it's not so complex, and I think there are not many, I don't know, and I don't think like it's the main topic of the book, but it's, yeah, like that's a good point. For example, back then we wanted to use hash map from the standard library, and then we used something else, like a hash map. I don't know, like from which crate it was, maybe hash brown. Which was faster than the hash map from the standard library. I think it was hash brown. I'm not so sure now. So like these things can make a difference. So just know that if you look for speed and performance, it could be that like the things you use in your standard library might not be the best implementation of the thing you want, and have a look in other crates.
All right. Do we have any other last minute questions here?
Well, if no one else has one, I do have another. About the does your book go over authentication at all, or what the current ecosystem looks like around solving that?
Yeah. So this will come up the one after this, I think. I do know databases in chapter 7, and I think that like the chapter 8, now I have to double check if it's not like 9 or 8, will go through like an authentication flow. OAuth 2 or like your own implementation or cookies. So we'll go through like the differences and which crates you can use, and like what you have to maybe implement yourself and whatnot. So in this regards, it shows that Rust is still a bit in its early stages. It's not yet like a fully fledged like you would have in Java or in Ruby or in Python. It still like needs some thinking and work. But yeah, like the book will have the answers.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there aren't any more last minute questions here, I just want to repost the prize draw form in case you haven't had a chance to look at that, and enter your name into the draw for the live video. And yeah, I think we will be moving on to our news segment, which we'll probably try and cover in a few minutes here. Let me just share my screen. So this will give you some time to enter your name in if you haven't done so already. And let's hop over to the Pocket. So I got a few stories from last month as well, which we didn't cover. So I'm going to quickly go through those as well. So there have been a couple of updates to the Rust compiler itself. This 1.56.1 version addresses a security concern. So if you haven't upgraded yet, you may want to get on that. I also took down this article. It's about RustDoc. So RustDoc can now automatically scrape code examples from your workspace's examples directory as documentation, which is pretty cool. You can check out the original post later. I will be posting the links to all the news articles as usual. Here's another story on, I believe, the new executive director for the Rust Foundation. So yeah, there's been a lot of news around the Rust Foundation lately, as we'll see from this month's articles. So let me go back to here. Let's go to this month's stories. Yeah, so a little bit of drama in the community these days with the whole mod team resignation. if you want to know more about that, again, I'll be posting that story a little bit later, and you can check out the original story itself and see why the mod team decided to resign. On the more positive note, Rust takes a major step forward as Linux's second official language. So there's been a lot of talk about this for a while, about having Rust in the Linux kernel, and it seems more and more likely that that's actually going to happen. So this is pretty exciting news for Rust. Here's a story about async runtimes that I picked out. This is from N. Cameron. It's about addressing the problem of the ecosystem kind of being fragmented right now over different async runtimes, and how we're going to try to tackle this going forward as a community. So outlined as a sort of long-term-ish plan, but yeah, it's still something that's going to be in the works for quite some time to try and, I guess, unify the ecosystem on a single async runtime. And in more recent news, we also have a follow-up to that moderation team resignation issue. So yeah, there's actually a response to that. And it seems like, you know, steps are being taken to address the problems. And overall, I think things are going in a positive direction. So that's good. But yeah, we'll see how the situation unfolds, of course. And last but not least, there's another release for Rust here. So this allows you to panic in const context, which is nice. Definitely helpful if you're doing a lot of compile time stuff. And yeah, you can check this out on your own time. And that's it for today's news segment. So let's quickly get to the prize draw. So as usual, or well, maybe not as usual, but last time I used the playground to pick a winner. And I think we're going to do that again this time because it's more fun to do it in Rust this way. So yeah, here's like a really basic little function that just uses the rand crate, and it just generates a number between 2 and whatever the end index is here that I set. And yeah, that's how we're going to determine the winner, because if you've responded to the live video prize draw, and let me just quickly close this, then all your answers will be here in the spreadsheet. And the way that this works is this is going to pick a random number between 2 and some index, and that'll be corresponding to the row in this spreadsheet. So since we have 9 here.
How to apply for that, Jonathan?
Oh, did you miss the window to enter your name in the draw? Sorry.
I didn't apply for it actually.
Sure. Just enter your name in the chat right now, like the name that you want for me to contact. It should be a name that I should be able to find on Meetup, because I need to be able to contact you after the event if you win.
Okay, so my name is Rajkumar Natarajan. Okay, I entered my name.
All right, I'll just add you manually to the spreadsheet. That's fine. All right, so yeah, we're just going to go ahead and run the program then. Oh, and we have exactly 10 people, so that's perfect. And no, I didn't switch to integer 32 because I just didn't really feel like using the faster playground. So the winner is number 5, Oga's Bill Jenner. I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that, but congratulations. Are you still here? Are you with us? I think they left actually. Okay, well, congratulations anyway if you're watching the video afterwards. But yeah, I will be reaching out to them, and I'll be sending them the code. But yeah, we have about 8 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions or anything they want to talk about today, now is the time. Feedback. I should also mention, we also have a repo with all of our past talks with the presentation slides. I don't know if you wanted to make a pull request into that, Bastian, but
Yeah, I can. Do you have the link?
let me see if I can pull that up.
And the recording, does this live on YouTube, or like where do you store it or post it?
Yeah, I usually post them to our Vancouver Rust Meetup YouTube channel. I usually do like a tiny bit of editing.
Yeah.
So, like for example, I'll probably be cutting out the part where you pulled up your DMs with your wife.
Thanks.
Here we go. Got it. I'll post the link here.
Perfect. I will do.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to mention before you all go is our call for participation. So, as always, we're looking for people who are willing to present at the meetups. So, if there's anything you want to talk about that's related to Rust, maybe you want to show off a cool project you've been working on, or a neat library that you found, anything really, then you go ahead and contact either me or Bochun, and we can help schedule you in for a talk sometime in the next year. I believe we already have a talk lined up for January, so any slot from February onward will be fine. And yeah, that's it for today. So thank you all very much for coming to the Vancouver Rust Meetup. And yeah, actually, Bochun, did you want to stick around? I wanted to chat with you a little bit.
Yeah, let's have a talk. Thank you, everyone. See you next month.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Hey guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.